Good afternoon, my name is Damien Ivory. I'm the owner of a small RSP in Tasmania called Lonsdale. Today I want to talk about the 121 POI decision. So this was a decision made by the ACCC around about 2011. So this was in the very early stages of the planning stage, in fact, of the NBN. When originally designed, NBN wanted to provide services and bring them all back to the nearest capital city, so one for each state, and then at that point hand across to the internet service providers to connect people up to the internet. These places are called points of interconnect. They are sort of a physical place, but for our purposes they may as well be. So the idea was to have 14 points of interconnect. The major capital cities would have 2 points of interconnect for backup, so there'd be a primary. If that one failed, it would go to the alternate. In some of the smaller capital cities like Hobart and Darwin, there would just be the one. Now, this created an issue for Telstra and Optus, because they had spent a significant amount of money rolling out fibre to all the exchanges, basically for their other communications, ADSL typically, but also telephone calls. So these services were all going to become redundant, or these bits of infrastructure were going to become redundant. And they objected to a government project funded by the government, essentially competing in their space. They felt like the backhaul market, which is the connections between the exchanges back to the internet, was theirs, and the government, in the form of NBN, had no right to be part of that. So they complained to the ACCC. The ACCC held some hearings, and there were people on the other side, such as Simon Hackett from Internode, who vociferously said no, the existing model was the right one. Telstra and Optus wanted the points of interconnect to be in the old exchanges, so that would have been some 650, whereas the rest of the industry, who didn't have their own infrastructure, wanted it the way NBN did, which was some 14 points. The ACCC, in a decision that arguably pleased neither side, came to a middle ground of 121 points of interconnect. And so they forced NBN to redesign their network to have these 121 points, and RSPs were now going to be forced, if they wanted to connect directly to the NBN, to connect all these 121 POIs if they wanted to provide a national coverage. And that's something that a lot of RSPs want to do. They don't want to have a separate market for different cities and different towns. They want to just have a same market, same pricing all the way across Australia. So why is this important? Well, if you're a small RSP, the costs of connecting to all those points of interconnect is very significant. You have to rent space from other carriers to get to those points of interconnect. You have to pay for NBN's connection onto the NBN, called an NNI. All the infrastructure you have to purchase or rent to keep your service running is significant. This is not a big problem for the big players. They have a lot of that infrastructure already, and so they were quite happy with that decision. So what has this done to the competitive marketplace? Well, it's quite clear that it's shut all the smaller RSPs out of the market. They are then forced to buy from aggregators, and aggregators are companies who take the NBN connections from all these points of interconnect, aggregate them back into the way NBN was going to provide them into the capital cities, possibly one, possibly more, before it's handed off to the small RSP. So the reason why that's an issue is twofold. First of all, of course, it means that these big carriers effectively are the gatekeepers onto the NBN. What prices they charge, which are completely unregulated. Actually, that's not quite true. There is some regulation in that market, but it's not strong. But more importantly is they control access to NBN's systems and processes. So instead of being able to order a service directly from NBN, you had to order it with the wholesale aggregator, who then would turn around and take your request for a new service and connect it to the order NBN to connect it. They would then bring that connection through their network and then deliver it to the RSP. Not only is there price issues with that, obviously the wholesale aggregator can charge what they like, but also there is it's a really complicated, hard process. If you can imagine, every fault ticket that is lodged every time somebody has an issue with their NBN connector, they contact their RSP, the RSP contacts the wholesaler then contacts NBN. Every stage, a rebooking of appointment goes back and forth through that chain. That complexity leads to very much poorer service and very much increased costs. This is particularly true in the early days because the wholesalers did not have very good automated systems, arguably some still don't, where the RSP was, where the wholesale aggregator was doing everything manually. So literally there was a person involved in every stage of this process. This, as I say, not only led to very poor service, but also high levels of costs. There has been some moves to try and fix this issue caused by that 121 points of interconnect. There's a new product called Virtual NNI, or NNI Link, which was a sort of hybrid between the two, which allows people to buy an RSP, a small RSP, to buy a connection from NBN, but then put that connection over somebody else's link to be delivered back to them in the capital city. So that does fix a lot of the process issues. It doesn't fix some of the cost issues because, of course, still the provider, the wholesale aggregator, if you like, while they're no longer responsible for the NBN part of the connection, they still do get to charge what they like for that backhaul link. And to my knowledge, there are only two aggregators who are providing that virtual NNI link service. The two major ones, Telstra and Optus, to my knowledge, still are not interested in offering it. I think they see it as a competitive disadvantage for them to have that in the market. So a lot of the issues we've seen with the massive consolidation in the industry as the NBN rolled out has been caused by this 121 points of interconnect. There used to be a lot of smaller companies like Ionet, Internode, Dodo, iPrimus. They've all been gobbled up by larger players, knowing that they had to get scale in order to be able to afford to connect directly to the NBN. And so the net result is that the big four, Telstra, Optus, TPG and Vocus, essentially own about 90, I think it's 90% of the market. It's a big chunk. Vocus is very much the smallest of those of the four, and so between the top three, it's still about 85 or 80% of the market. A very poor state of competition, and of course, whenever you have poor competition, you always get high prices, low quality of service, and the like. And we've definitely seen this in the NBN market. Some of it, this poor performance, has been caused by the technology itself, and there's been lots of commentating on that. But I think it's important to note that a lot of those issues are made a lot worse by the poor state of competition. And don't forget, competition isn't always about reducing the price. It's also about being innovative. It's allowing smaller RSPs to come up with new methods of offering services on the NBN. These can only be done typically if you are directly connected to the NBN or at least able to order services directly from it. Just talking about my own company, Lontel, we have gone through wholesale aggregators, found it a very dispiriting experience, a very frustrating. We had no quality of no control over the quality of our network, and so we elected to start connecting directly to NBN. So far, we've only done this in Tasmania and ACT, and this is the fundamental issue. You have, as a small RSP, you have to choose between connecting directly and having control over your network, control of the quality of the products you provide, or national coverage. And we've chosen the former, but the problem is, of course, if you order a service, you can't order a service from us in Sydney at the moment. There is one company, though, that should be pointed out, that has actually bitten the bullet and connected to every POI in the country, and that's Aussie Broadband. Aussie Broadband, run by a guy called Phil Britt. He decided some years ago that he too was fed up with wholesale aggregators. I believe they used Optus, but I may be corrected on that. And he decided to start a whole process for building out to all the points of interconnect. It's by all accounts cost him a fair amount of money, and the jury's still out on whether in the end it will work out. It's looking promising. There's no question that he provides a very good service. In some ways, he has very similar roots to our own. He's an engineer, just like I am, and he is very keen on the quality of his network. So really, they are the only RSP that has national coverage and is directly connected to the NBN. All the other RSPs you look at, if they're not one of the major four, or owned by one of the major four, is going through a wholesale aggregator. And you can expect that the quality of the internet will be poorer, and certainly the quality of the servicing in terms of both connecting a service or fixing faults is definitely going to be the worst for it. So that's it. That's my section on the NBN points of interconnect and how it had a dramatic effect on the quality of the NBN, and still does to this day. And I think it is one of those decisions that cannot now be revisited. It was made, and the network designed around it. It cannot be undone, unfortunately. All right, see you in another video.